All right, cool. All right, so let's begin. Verify and secure. Honestly, the way that I think about this session, Katie, is that this is our sixth session. This is the best session. And if you understand this and if you can articulate this, then it's basically going to be like almost 80% of all of our sales motions. So everything was like building. It's like almost Karate Kid, like, you know, wax on, wax off. This is the one in which like you learn how to throw like a mean punch. Um, let's talk about why, right? So in terms of the agenda, what are we doing today? Our goal is to better articulate, verify, and secure functionality. Once again, this is almost our entire value proposition. How are we going to do this? We're going to understand what this is from a technical perspective. I'm not going to inundate you in terms of, you know, like, hey, this dependency, blah, blah, and whatever. Like, everything's going to be super tailored to why a customer cares about these things and why GitLab can fundamentally help our customers. The other thing that we're going to do is we're going to see these stages in action in GitLab. I'm a visual learner, so I'm just going to show you how it works in terms of our product itself. All right, so if you look at command the message, we basically list out all of our differentiators in terms of importance. And I literally copied and pasted this from our handbook. The top 3 differentiators that we have in the market all have to do with verify and secure. This is extremely important to understand because these are unique value points that our customers cannot easily replicate. One of the things that I want to talk about this and is that even though these are unique differentiators for us now, it's really not going to be the case in a year to a year and a half because Microsoft's pouring all this money into GitHub. And if you give them enough time, they're going to catch up for a lot of these different areas. So it's really important for us to tell our story in the next year and a year and a half so that we can basically land grab as a company. That's the reason why we're staffing up sales so much. And that's the strategic direction that we're trying to do as a company. So I think point number 3 I've already driven home, but understanding these 2 features is really, really, really important to our customer conversations. SCM and plan, it's like tape measures. When I'm in a hardware store and I'm trying to select between one and another, I don't really care, right? So like one might be a little bit longer than another, but fundamentally don't care. They all fundamentally do the same thing. And why is that? Part of the reason why is because they operate in crowded spaces, right? So I typed into Google best management tools and I got this one site. It's the #1 ranked site, but the 40 best project management software tools. Do you want to compete against 40 other tools, or do you want to be unique and talk about our unique differentiators and basically instantly separate yourself from every other tool that's out there, right? So GitLab has unique differentiators right now. They will probably stick around for a year to year and a half because of our first movers advantage. But we really got to make great use of this the time that we have so that we can use these in our sales conversations and to get like customers. Yeah, so GitLab special, let's tell its story. One of the things, and this has to do with that homework question that we talked about earlier. So GitLab is so different than everyone else that people don't really fully understand our value proposition. I've sold a lot of products before. Sometimes you know when you're talking about something that's fake and you're just sort of like, oh, this is just what marketing wants me to say. GitLab really is special. And the idea of having one unified tool for the entire DevOps lifecycle, basically no one else is doing this out of the entire tech space. People don't fully understand the value behind this, which is part of the reason why in our conversations, I think that one of the things that we have to do so much is to educate everyone. Just because like literally they see us as another tool. Are we a tool? Yes, but like we are different than every other tool. All right, so let's just dive right into verify. So imagine you're writing a 300-page book without your automated like spell and grammar checker, and then you hand it into an editor. Well, if you're like most people, then you're going to spell a lot of stuff wrong. And then the editor is probably going to get pissed, and then they'll spend all this time editing everything, hand it back to you. Then you have to go like, and then you basically would go back and forth like maybe 10 times. And each of these times would take a ton of time, which basically is money, right? Because time is money. So if you had an automated spell/grammar checker while you were writing your paper or your book itself, how would that speed up your project? Well, being able to edit this in real time, it would basically give you feedback, and it would save your editor's time. The copies that you gave your editor would be way cleaner, right? Um, and so this is basically what Verify is. Verify gives you automated quality checks for software, which allows you to write better software quicker. That's basically what we do here. So we got to talk more about Agile. Everyone, if you talk to any director or even like a senior manager of implementing Agile is something that people care about. It's one of their strategic, it's on their strategic roadmap, right? And just to, you know, like, as like a reminder, that's the word. So Agile is basically a philosophy, and CI/CD is how you implement Agile. So just as an example, social justice is like this like theoretical concept. And how do we get social justice? Well, one way we can get social justice is giving everyone the right to vote, right? So this is basically the takeaway without getting super much in the weeds. A development team implementing Agile with a mature CI/CD stack. So what I basically mean by this is like they have really great Agile methodologies. They have a really great CI/CD system, is maybe 10 times more effective than someone who doesn't have these things. So like there's all sorts of studies that validate this. This isn't just marketing talk. And I've actually seen it in my own engineering career about how this can really like help people develop better software faster. The big takeaway with this is that everyone's trying to implement Agile. Most people are failing at it. And the value add that we have as a company is that GitLab makes this easy. So just also a reminder about Agile versus Waterfall. Most people develop software through what we call a waterfall methodology. And so what that means is that, let's just say that we're building a house, right? So I'd meet with a contractor. I would write down like a 10-page document exactly detailing what I want. And then I would disappear for, you know, like 6 months and then come back in and find my house. Well, the problem with this is that there's always some interpretation in the requirements, right? Or you'll always like leave something out or something's not as detailed as it could be. And then, so the problem is that your contractor, he might misinterpret something, build a room the wrong way, and then build multiple other rooms on top of that room. So it's not all that simple and just like updating this one room on the bottom now, because everything else is built on top of it. So when you have a waterfall type of software development, then it's very iterative at the end, in the sense that like your stakeholders come back, they're not happy, the developers have to rip stuff out, fix stuff that's super expensive because so many other things are bolted on top of it. And it's very expensive and time consuming. So the difference, if you have a waterfall project that's maybe 4 months, well, after the developers are done handing in everything, it might take them maybe 2 months or like 50% additional time to get everything finally right. So contrast that with Agile. Agile is more iterative. So the idea with Agile is, hey, let's lay the foundation. Now let's bring in, you know, bring me back in. Hey, do you like the foundation? Yes or no? Do we need to update it? No. Okay, great. And then, you know, put up the scaffolding. Hey, is the scaffolding what you expect? Are these rooms the right dimensions? And then, so the great value, if you have an Agile approach, is that you can find errors as they're happening, which allows you to course correct way quicker. So the benefit of Agile is that it prevents you from going down the wrong path. And as opposed to building a room in the wrong place and then bolting on all these additional rooms on top of it, you have one room that we'd catch a mistake as this room's being built, you know, saving us time ultimately. So everyone wants to implement Agile. Most people are unsuccessful. And part of the reason why is because Agile requires a lot more work, right? So you have a lot more check-ins, you have to communicate more. Sometimes people don't want to communicate. Sometimes communication's like not complete, right? And GitLab allows you to automate a lot of this, ultimately saving you time, money, and allowing you to implement Agile quickly. So another thing to talk about is that it eliminates human error, right? So, you know, with automation, everything's standardized. So this should sound pretty similar to like Ansible, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it does.
That's cool. All right, so let's actually just take a look at GitLab. So this is GitLab itself. People are trying to implement all of their code changes. And so here's all the code changes that are coming in. As you can see over here, every single one of these code changes that are coming in, we're actually running tons and tons and tons of tests on it. So the tier 1 level of test that we have is just the fact that other people are looking at it. So this is what we call the code review process. And as you can see, this person's peers, there's people that are questioning him on why he did this a certain way, right? So he's saying, hey, have you thought about, doing it some other way? And then they go back and forth, ultimately creating a better product when you have more people collaborating. The other thing that I really want to point out is pipelines. So these are basically where all of our automated checks come in. In the beginning of this presentation, I talked about how like for Word documents, you have automated checks for like spelling and grammar. For GitLab, we have automated checks for software. And then so there's around like 5 to 6 different things that we do, but it's extensible. So you could literally have 10 different things that we can do. So every one of these commits that are coming in, we literally do for this specific merge request, we do this many test phases over a hit. So it's not just like spelling and grammar, it's literally, as you can see, it's 7 automated phases to prepare, 4 automated phases for building and like test preparation. In terms of quality check, there's maybe 25 different phases that we use for GitLab itself. And then so ultimately, this is preventing people from going down that wrong path. All of these integrated quality checks. So some of these are security related. Some of these are just sort of like verifying individual things in our product itself. So this is for GitLab itself. An individual check could be, hey, does this button work as intended? Does this button, if I click it, does it produce this drop down? But there's other types of tests as well. So like if I log out of GitLab, does it take me to the right screen? If I log back in, does it take me to the right screen? What happens if I try to log in 5 times, all using the same account? Should it reject me? And so on and so forth. So that type of specific, like this has to do with what we call software testing. And this is actually what I used to do full time. I used to write software tests as my job. And how a software test works is that here's this house, right? How I can verify this house as a whole, if it's structurally sound, is if I like verify each individual chunk is sound. So, hey, if I put pressure on this window, does it like fall out? Hey, like is the concrete up for safety specifications? Are there fire detectors in every single, in as like many rooms as required? So for Ansible, which was the last product that I worked on, there were thousands of software tests for Ansible itself. And each one of these things could be as small as, does this button work as intended, to something that's as big as, hey, if I turn Ansible Tower off and if I turn it back on, like, does it boot back up? So the type of people that like make these software tests are called test engineers. And what they do all day is they write software tests and they administer them. So that's what GitLab does. There's all sorts of different software tests, and the basic point with this is that GitLab does all of this stuff. And it's actually really good at like integrating with all the different types of tests that people have.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, for sure.
Is the title QA, is that a software tester? It's quality assurance?
Yeah. Yep. Quality assurance.
Oh. So can I ask another real-time example?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so one of my prospects who ran a trial of GitLab last year, can I go ahead and share my screen?
Yeah.
Or do you, okay.
I think I have to stop.
Oh, okay. Yes, you do. Okay, one of the prospects that I'm looking at is QA team lead. And so he mentions like all these different things. So clearly he can code in a lot of different languages. He says different things in his tool stacks. In his tool stack, would a relevant piece of information to share with him be talking about like the last slide that you said, how GitLab has quality, or it has a software test built in, or it's.
Yeah, so the way to
Yeah.
frame it is that like what they're doing is we don't give you the software test, but we can run the software test for you. So let me just explain it. So it's like, here's like this house, right? You have to write the individual pieces of code that say, hey, is there a fire alarm here? Is there a fire alarm here? Is there a fire alarm here? And then you run all of these software tests in some sort of automated loop. What happens is that the software testers, they come back, every morning, and then they basically look at the test results. And then so that's how their job works. So we don't give you the tests themselves, but you need some sort of like server that's running all of those tests every night at midnight. And most people use Jenkins for that. GitLab can also be used for that. And in all honesty, it's way better than Jenkins.
So is that a conversation that you'd be trying to, I don't know, discover pain points with Jenkins?
Yeah, exactly. So that person that you specifically mentioned, it looks like they're using Jenkins. So I would ask them all the sort of pain points with Jenkins and see if there's an opportunity there.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. All right, so we're going to talk about some of the other things that we do in the verify stage. Once again, this isn't the any-day technical information, but this is basically our value proposition, right? So another type of test that we give is what we call linting. And I've been on calls in which the entire deal depended on whether or not we linted for a specific programming language. So this is something that people care about. So when we were in college, we were writing all sorts of papers, and then we had like the Chicago Style Guide or the MLA handbook. And then that's like how we basically like determine how citations and, how to basically write. Well, there's actually an analogous thing for coding, which tells you how many like spaces you need. So it's actually really funny. In Python, there's this thing called pep8, and it tells you things like, hey, do you indent 1 time or 2 times? Like, do you use like how long should your lines be and stuff like that. So this is actually really important. I know that it sounds really ridiculous, but the whole reason why there's linting is so that coding is more readable for the next guy. And you don't write like your coding stuff in some sort of crazy way, which is actually a really big problem. It's not something that's super intuitive, so you might just have to take my word for it. But just to summarize, what linting is it's basically implementing style guidelines for coding, just like how MLA handbook, theoretically, if you wrote everything according to MLA, your papers would sound better. So things like pep8 allow you to write your code in a more clear manner, which helps out your entire team. Because obviously programming is like, like a team sport somewhat. All right, so that's linting. Next up is review apps. This is a really big deal. If you talk to engineers or engineering managers, or even, I wouldn't say like a director, maybe, senior managers definitely, architects definitely, but review apps are a huge deal. And in my opinion, we don't talk about them enough. So in the merge request process, whether or not you're using Bitbucket or GitHub or, like GitLab or whatever, then fundamentally what you're doing as an engineer is I have to go proofread other people's stuff before they get their code merged, right? And all I see is the lines that they've changed. So over here, this is just sort of 4 lines of change. It's changing some sort of authentication thing. And then I can ask a question. But the big problem with this is that fundamentally, I'm only guessing at what this code does, right? I don't fundamentally know. If you have a review app, then it will actually create a live version of that application that you can see the changes. And then during the review process, you can know concretely what this change does as opposed to just guessing at what this change does. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Hey, Chris, can you share your screen? I don't think you turned it back on after.
Oh.
Yeah, no worries. Also, with linting is linting a functionality of GitLab where like if a developer put in code that didn't match the style guidelines of whatever they were writing and that it would correct while they were writing it? Or is it a test that you do after, like similar to a security test where like it'll kind of just continuously run?
Yeah, so it would lint during the merge process, the merge review process itself. So if you remember like that gigantic like flow chart that it was like there's like 30 stages in testing, that's when linting would run. And then if it said like, hey, you introduced 4 things that don't make sense, then in the merge request it would show those 4 things.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, I see what you're saying now.
Yep. So this is linting. Once again, PEP 8. But like, yeah, it would tell you like, hey, how do you indent? How long should your lines be? So like all sorts of like different conventions for writing code. Yeah, so if I didn't ever view apps, this is just what I see. I have to decide whether or not to accept this merge request based on my understanding of what this does, which ultimately is incomplete, right? With a review app, you get a live version of the application, and then now you can bang around on it and see if it works or not, which is way better. It will save your developers a lot of time. Okay, so that's the verify stage. Let's talk about security. These 3 things here are commanding the message. This is the last 1/3 of commanding the message. And we're talking about reducing security and compliance risk. So this is super important to understand. GitLab is special in that we offer security scanning as part of the development process. Right now, we have the most complete solution in the market for this. GitHub is trying to catch up. They do have some stuff, but in all honesty, we are way ahead right now. So we got to talk about the status quo, right? For the vast majority of development shops, they verify security at the end of projects. And obviously that's not agile, right? So in terms of building the house, hey, we could have built something that's incorrect because we're testing this all the way at the end, we might have to correct a lot of things and rip out a room. Another thing about a status quo is that most smaller shops, they can't hire their own dedicated security people, so they actually pay for security contracting. And these guys pay ridiculous amounts, or get paid ridiculous amounts of money. GitLab allows you to shift left. And this is something that our marketing talks about a lot. I think that it's really important to be cognizant when we talk about this in customer conversations that most people don't know what shifting left means. I guarantee you that like at Red Hat, if I pulled all the engineers and said, hey, do you know what shifting left means? Then less than 5, I'd say like less than 10% for sure of the engineers would know what this means. But it's fundamentally like one of the big problems that I have with our marketing is that like we advertise ourselves as shifting left, but no one knows what shifting left means. So we just need to be careful when we're using this term. But what does shifting left means? It basically means adopting an agile approach to security. So in your merge request, this is where, collaboration happens, right? And the before GitLab is that we test security all the way at the end. And we might have to rip out something and spend a lot of time fixing it. The after with GitLab is that our tests will actually determine when a new security vulnerability or something that's not safe is built in, and then people will comment because all of your security engineers are now on this tool, whereas before they weren't. People are collaborating across team. Then a security engineer could then say, hey, I've taken a look at your test results. You should fix it this way. And then the developer is like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. Thanks for helping me with this. And then they get it done in the development process itself, as opposed to fixing it all the way at the end. Once again, GitLab is one shared table. For most companies, these are the developers, these are the security people, these are the ops people. And what they're doing all the time is they're building that bridges that go nowhere because the teams aren't communicating with each other. With GitLab being one huge table, everyone can communicate. You're on one tool, you're collaborating way better. There's way better transparency across your organization, and that allows you to build better products faster. So let's just talk about how much money these guys make. In terms of just like, like the qualifying questions that would really find out pain points. So you could ask like, hey, how does your security, testing work? are you happy with it? Like, do you contract people out, or do you have people that are internal? If you contract them out, are you happy with the amount of money that you spend on this, right? Security contractors make a ton of money. As you can see, it's like the more specialized you are as an engineer, the more money you require. And these guys are like elite engineers. They do not come cheap. So GitLab gives you the ability to do all of this in an automated fashion, saving you money. But it's also something to be cognizant of, is that our security testing only comes with the highest tier of GitLab, which is 5 times as much expensive as the second tier. So we basically have to justify the value of that. Well, how do we justify the value of that? Is that, hey, you don't have to hire these guys, or you can hire less of these guys, right? All right, so there's a bunch of different phases with security testing, and each of these phases matters a lot. And understanding these and articulating these is really important for our customer conversations. So something that we talked about all the time is SAST and DAST. These are complementary. What SAST is it's basically you have a static version of your code, and it's going to basically look at any vulnerabilities from the code itself. So it doesn't have a live version of your application. It's just looking at this code and then seeing if like I can exploit it somehow. So that is why it's called static application security testing. So contrast that with dynamic application security testing. This requires a live running version of your application. And what it does is it's going to try to break your website. And so what they do is basically, hey, if I log in 500 times within a second, then can I like break into your website? If I log in the same account from my phone and then a MacBook and then from Russia, then like does the website get confused? Like, does it handle all those like requests in the right way? So once again, the difference between these is that they're complementary. You really need both. SAST is 80% of what you need because it's faster, but DAST is totally needed too. So SAST is just looking at the code. DAST, you have a live running version of the application that you're trying to exploit in some manner. Another thing that people can do is they try to inject in code here. So for like this username field, if I typed in like, so it's expecting a string, like, like cwang or, something like that. But if I actually type in like .json, .inject, like code here, then sometimes I can break this application and exploit it. That's actually fundamentally how some websites get hacked, and I'll show you that in a little bit. So the other thing, moving on, so one of the other things that we do is container scanning. Everyone wants to move to containers. Right now, around 5 to 10% of all workloads are on containers. And everyone understands that in the next 5 to 10 years that they want to use containers. But one of the big problems with containers is that 99% of them are insecure. It's a huge problem. So the way that I describe this is that like technology is evolving really quickly, and containers are really been adopted in the last 2 years. And then so developers are falling in love with containers, they're starting to use it. And then after developers start using it, then everyone else they have to figure out like, hey, there's this new thing. How do we test it? How do we verify that it's secure? And simply because it takes time to figure all that stuff out, security and testing and all that other stuff is going to lag behind the technology itself. That's the reason why container security is a big space right now. And what we can allow you to do is, if you're using any containers that are insecure, we'll actually let you know that they're insecure, and we'll let you know why they're insecure. So if like this container that you're using has these 5 vulnerability problems with them, then we will let you know those exact 5 vulnerability problems. We do this using this thing called Claire. So dependency scanning, once again, as a reminder, so just like how a car is made up of all these different components, and so you have wheels, you have a transmission, you have an engine, and they're all bolted together. All of software is made up of different components. So for a website, you have a database that stores all the user information, you have a web front end, you have an API, and then they're all integrated together. So each of those individual components you can think of as like a dependency. And the problem is that each of these things can go out of date or may need a safety recall from time to time. So it's like if your car, you have a problem with the airbags, you might need to fix them. It's the same thing with software. So We might find out that like this version of your API is actually like has a problem with it, and so you need to update it. And so what we allow you to do is we will scan all of the constituent parts of your application and let you know, hey, you're using Django 3.1.2. Well, it has this problem, this problem, this problem. You should consider upgrading to 3.2.5 because that's when the problems go away. So we allow you to do that in the security scanning process. Fuzz testing is something that is on our roadmap. So over here, we just acquired 2 companies. And our goal is to have it built into GitLab in the fall and to have it like really completely like where this is like a big part of our value prop in the early spring of next year. So what fuzz testing is it's super, super advanced security testing. The vast majority of people don't know about it. But it's really important. So research shows that you can break 20 to 30% of applications by just injecting random stuff into your like various forms. And so I'm gonna go on Instagram real quick. Instagram. I do not have an Instagram account, so it's basically requiring me to sign up. If I go to the sign up field, then it's expecting a phone number and email. It's expecting my name and then a username and a password, right? But I'll just give you an example of a fuzz test. So as opposed to me typing in some letters, and then some more letters, an example of a fuzz test is like if I type in like numbers and then like symbols and like random stuff. So just to reiterate, 20 to 30% of all applications can be broken by just injecting random stuff into these fields. Another thing that it tests for is if I do something like this. So this is obviously fake, but you can inject code into these fields and hack websites. So there's all sorts of different things. You have MySQL injections, you have command line injections, you have JavaScript injections. But fundamentally what these are is that I'm exploiting this website by injecting code into these form fields where they're not intended. And so it's a huge problem. Honestly, as an engineer speaking firsthand, if I had this in my job, it would have saved me maybe like 20, 30% of my time. So it's a really huge deal and it's on our roadmap. And once we have it implemented, we should talk about it a lot. All right. So that's all the security features that are really important. There are more minor ones, but just some miscellaneous stuff that we want to talk about in terms of just our customer conversations, because these are things that are going to come up in your customer conversations. So there's 2 things that we need to know about. What a GitLab runner is it's the machine that runs all of the tests. So I'll just give you an example of this. There's a machine that runs this website, but there's a separate machine that actually performs all of these tests. And the GitLab runner is the machine that performs all these tests. So it's the one that will spin up, that will run your unit tests and things like that. So there's separate machines. When people talk about GitLab runners, you're talking about the machines that actually like do all of like this verification. Our runners are actually really, really good. And one thing that you could do in terms of your Jenkins conversations is just talk about how easy they are to set up and scale. So they can scale up and down the cloud. That saves you a lot of money. It's not something that Jenkins really does. Another thing about them is that they're super easy to upgrade. Jenkins is really difficult to upgrade. So we have a lot of really great comparative things here. The other thing is that there's this thing that customers are going to ask you about. It's the gitlab.ci.yaml file. And what this is this is the file that controls all of these tests. So over here, you can see that I have 7 phases, then 2, then 2, then like around 30, and then 2, and then 1. So there's one file that controls what happens. And if you take a look over here, that's this file. And you can see all the different stages here. And basically everything is specified that we just saw because of this file. So it's like the master settings file that determines what happens in our CI. I know that does a lot of information, but just to summarize everything real quickly, yeah, so here's command to the message, and we have a unique story. And our unique story is that it is one tool for your entire DevOps lifecycle, ultimately saving you time, money, and we allow you to implement Agile, which will give you transparency and better collaboration across your organization. So everyone's under pressure. Most engineering projects fail. If your projects are failing consistently, then as managers, you get fired. So you have a lot of pressure there. And we can allow you to implement Agile and CI/CD way better because we're one integrated solution. As opposed to you having to stitch all this stuff together, you just have to buy one thing, ultimately saving you a lot of money, time, and allowing you to develop better software faster in a more secure manner. So that's the verify and secure presentation. Cool. I'm gonna stop. How do I stop recording?